Hello, I'm Nuchy Mandel. I'm speaking out of Earmont, New York. I'm helping spread the beautiful light of spirituality across the world. The date of this recording is May 23rd of 2018. May my words and the expressions of my soul be gratifying to everyone who hears them. I pray that my ideas help pave a beautiful path in your journey of life. Thank you for tuning in. We are just after a wonderful Shavuos, which I had the privilege of spending with delightful people. We engaged in such awesome conversations, which in fact are the very inspiration for this. It is precisely these types of social settings that unlock my brain and spark the creativity that I need in order to do things like record podcasts and various other creative work. So delightful. Such a blessing. So many awesome conversations. I spent the yontiv with a couple individuals who have grown up in the ultra-Orthodox community, like myself, and we fell into some very important conversation, which is not new to me because just a couple weeks prior a couple days prior, on Lag BaOmer, I was sitting and talking about the same thing with another friend of mine. So this is a very common and reoccurring topic for myself. I have some ideas that I'd like to share on the topic. So what is the topic? The topic is knowing where you stand, or knowing your place. Truthfully, I don't even know the title. At the time of this recording, I haven't yet figured out the title for the podcast, so I can't be very precise with the words, but the idea is to know where you are as a health mechanism. It is a part of emotional and spiritual health and stability for one to figure out, determine, and come to terms with where they are and not live under various fantasies, which in turn breed all kinds of emotional heartaches down the road. So let's get into this. You know that I don't like hovering too long before I jump right into the good stuff, so I'm going to jump right in, and hopefully with Hashem's help you'll find it's a content as life-altering as I have myself for myself. I'm surrounded, myself included, by a lot of people who have grown up in the ultra-Orthodox community and have left it, or what we've been labeled OTD, off the derech. So that means we grow up in the ultra-Orthodox community, which is pure extremism from a religious, fanatical standpoint. Not much of free will, not much of individuality. You can learn more about this by listening to my videos regarding the topic of OTD, but I imagine most people listening to this are familiar with the ultra-Orthodox community and what it entails growing up in there. So the people that I surround myself with have gone through similar journeys as myself. And we left, rebelled. It could be viewed upon in many different ways, but in one way or another, at some point in our life, somewhere between the ages of, I would say, 13 and 30, we unleashed. We took the leash off. We were not religious, not observant. And we went out, we experienced, had fun, basically did whatever we wanted. So we went through a period of rebelling / becoming non-religious, living a more secular lifestyle, or at least exposing ourselves to the secular world on various degrees. Some people never do, but I know with me and my friends we did. And then many years later, we come to rethink, or for some, not rethink. For me, it wasn't a process of rethinking. I never actually thought about religiosity or God, our purpose, or anything like that. It was just a process of thinking for the first time. In other words, when we rebelled, when we went through our process of letting go of everything that we went through, we didn't really think about God, religion in the sense of a purpose. All we knew is that we grew up a certain way. It was not interesting nor intriguing, and we adapted behaviors that were cooler and more interesting. But this was young. We were young, 15 and under, and after some years pass, you reach adulthood, you naturally begin to think about life, our purpose, what we're doing here, and each to their own, everyone in their own beautiful way, got connected to some form of meaning, some form of healing, some form of connection. And this is very common. It happens for many in every which way, but a very large majority of individuals who go OTD end up, years down the road, religious again. Only the religious that they end up in is very far removed from what they grew up in. And this happens for myself, most of my friends, or at least I could say half of my friends, and many, friends of friends, practically most people we know from the community. It's a very common and reoccurring phenomenon. So, where does the issue begin? Well, what happens, or what appears to be happening, is this. I've thought about this a lot of introspection, a lot of compartmentalization, a lot of organization. It really takes a lot of organizing various different aspects of what we might be feeling, why we might be feeling it, our behaviors, our actions, our motives. I'm quite certain with what I'm about to share, and I do so with pleasure, with love. And of course, with open-mindedness. I'm obviously not associated with the type of education and approach that has been forced upon me when I was young. I am religious. I value religion, but I've come to approach it in a whole new way. And with this, I'm able to view these phenomenons, if I may call it that, from a little bit of a different angle. What seems to be happening, well, let's first, I'm going to try to describe the issue and how we get to the problem, the symptom and how we get to the solution. We find God or religion through a new version of spirituality. Perhaps it's through God, personal prayer, personal stories, revelation, whatever it may be that captured you. However God hugged you, whatever kind of divine providence manifested in your life. We become religious, so we accept the yoke of, I suppose, the Torah or various aspects of traditional Judaism, keeping Shabbos, perhaps aspects of keeping kosher, and some of the other big stuff. And initially, right off the bat, we approach it with fervor, with all kinds of dedication and motivation. We feel good, we feel enthralled, and just all around so powerful, so happy, so intrigued, and more than anything, just giving it our all. And then years down the road, we begin to struggle a little bit with it. All of the sudden, it's not so easy. It's not so delightful. It's not so rewarding. It seems to be more work than payout, right? Yielding less dividends, and we're just putting in so much emotional, spiritual, and physical work. We're investing so much. And for each person, this may manifest in other different kinds of feelings and different kinds of struggles, but one way or another, this is what I am gathering from a lot of people who I speak to. And by default, you begin to question whether it's worth your investment, whether you have patience for it, what am I doing? And then you have the guilty conscience that's telling you, don't let it go, and all these just myriads and myriads of thoughts. Just endless thinking and probing and worrying. We could reach a point of feeling depleted. We feel like we're giving it so much and it's not giving back. We feel like we're trying so hard, yet we can't achieve. Why is that? So what I've come to find, and this is the main point that I'd like to share tonight. We grow up in the ultra-Orthodox community with extremism, obsession for our practices and the services and the mitzvot and everything that we're told we must do. We neglect it. We throw it away. It doesn't feel right. Perhaps you were abused. Maybe you're just not interested. Whatever it is, we threw it away. Then we reach adulthood, and for some, adulthood may be when you're 25 or 30, but meaning you reach maturity, and you begin to think about life, your purpose, what you're doing here, where you're going, how you'd like to live your life, and various other aspects. And because of your background, you will naturally think of religion and spirituality or God, and that is what happens as described. So you become religious, only this time you become religious from a new place, new teachings, new outlook. It's the new outlook, it is specifically the new outlook and the new teachings that is capturing you, that is making you say, wow, this is it. This is amazing. I want to be part of this. So you become religious. You still don't agree with all of what you've went through. You have your way. You've found your way in Judaism. But you end up approaching it with the same fervor, as I said, and the same obsession as you were taught from growing up. Think about that for a second. You were taught a certain way. You threw it away. Now you learn about this amazing version of what you were taught in the past. It intrigues you. You want to get involved. But the only tools, the only mechanism that you have for getting involved in something like this is what you were taught growing up. So you end up approaching it in certain aspects exactly the same way that you were taught growing up. You don't know any other way. And here's the phenomena that plays out, and when you think about it in this perspective, you'll see how it all makes sense. You learn a new Judaism. You learn a new spirituality, or perhaps the first spirituality. You learn about Hashem and the benefits of being close to Him. But you still didn't get rid of the extremism in your heart. Your obsessive behavior, personality. So you go into it, and this is why, on a very practical level, you can see people who become religious, are overly invested in the beginning. It looks even extreme. It doesn't matter if they are following a very open-minded outlook or sect. They overinvest, overcompensate, and they become missionaries. I don't have to explain much more because anyone who has seen it knows it. Anyone who has been through it knows it. That phenomenon itself is what I'm trying to point out. We jump in head first because that's all we know. That's how we were conditioned. If you listen to my podcast called Approaching Spirituality with Balance, I talk about a very similar idea, or perhaps even the same idea. But I was trying to bring out various other points, and at this point it's more evolved and thorough and so much more applicable to various parts of our life. But in that podcast I do bring out a similar point. If we were healthy, we wouldn't approach it, even if it's the best outlook in the world, we wouldn't approach it with such extremism. We would actually take it very slow. If we were emotionally healthy and spiritually healthy, we would evaluate, take baby steps, grow as we grow, and then let one thing build on each other. But because we are not, we didn't grow up with emotional stability per se, or spiritual education. We jump in head first, just like we were conditioned to do by the community who taught us so wrongly. So that's the first point. That's the first thing that takes place. Yes, you may have found a beautiful version of Judaism that's going to work for you. But the way you're approaching it is harmful to yourself, because you will end up in frustration, you will end up giving up, you will end up with doubts. And the teachings that we learn tell us this. That is the most amazing and ironic part of it all. which brings us to the second point that I want to get to. The new outlook, the new stuff that we're learning is telling us how to approach Judaism, our relationship with God, our spiritual being. It's telling us what to do and what not to do. Yet there seems to be a huge disconnect between what we're learning and what we're doing internally. Let's forget about externally for a minute. Internally, how we feel. We're learning these amazing things. It's telling us how to think, how to feel, how to approach your spiritual and religious journey, what to do and what not to do for the sake of your own health and well-being. And you believe it. You're reading it. You're listening to it on CDs and podcasts and videos. Yet it's not working out. Yet there's a huge gap between that and how you feel. Why? Because you're not, in reality, even though you might think you are, you're not actually putting into practice what you are learning. You are putting into practice what you were conditioned from when you grew up in the ultra-Orthodox community. Think about this, let it resonate. I've thought about this so much. I know about this idea for years. It's becoming more and more apparent to me. The more people I speak to, as I said, beautiful conversations, only by way of beautiful conversations with people who are struggling with these things, does this come about. I'm so intimately familiar with it because I've gone through various aspects of all of these things myself. You are learning things, awesome material, spiritual, perhaps emotional, and religious development and practices. Yet 3 years down the road, you can't implement and you feel stressed out, you feel like you're giving up, you feel like it's too hard. So what I want to recommend is this. Try to throw away the way that you were taught growing up. I do feel that one of the reasons why I have an easier time with some of these aspects is because when I was sent away from my community at 13, I threw everything away. Everything. It was such a perfect age for me. I wasn't too invested, too deep in, too messed up. And I was sent away, exposed to a different lifestyle completely. I was able to throw away everything, all the garbage, all the disgusting, non-beneficial things that we were taught and drilled growing up. It was all in the garbage for me at a very young age. And that's why I believe that years later, when I learned about spirituality and I came back to religion from a whole different place, and I've been practicing it now for maybe about 7 years, I didn't struggle with this aspect too much, and I still don't. I got rid of that baggage, that extremism very young. So if you're a bit older and it still lingers, you can still get rid of it. It just has to be a conscious learning process. You have to learn about it, think about it, maybe pray to God if you need help, but let it go. You let so much go You really did. You changed your life. You live so differently. You live much healthier. Your perspective and outlook is so much better. But there's just certain parts that are clinging on to you that have to be let go as well. If you could just make the conscious decision to just let that go. You want to be an empty keli. You want to be an empty vessel so that new, better substance could fill it. As I was telling a friend of mine the other day, there are so many ways to approach everything. So we were talking about the aspect of being weak and, say, wasting your seed or masturbating. So we're taught that it's not a good thing spiritually. And because of the way that we were taught, we have guilt when we are weak. And I was trying to explain to him that there is a place, you could get to a place where you do the same thing you're doing now, minus the guilt, minus the stress, minus all the heartache that come with it. And you can be the same person. What I was trying to open him up to was that there are an infinite amount of ways to approach every idea in life and even in religion. So let's say you value the teachings that tell us to refrain from masturbation and wasting your seed. But if you do fall, or I should say when you do fall, because we're human, we all fall. We're all weak at certain points. So when you do fall, how you view it or how you deal with that whole topic, there are so many ways. Now, the community taught us one way, and of course they taught us the way of guilt. That was their way. Now, we're learning a new way. And just like we're learning a new way from the new version of spirituality or Judaism that you've exposed yourself to or become acquainted with, there are so many other ways. Just understanding that there are so many ways within knowledge, within understanding, within approach, just this concept alone should help lighten the load a little bit, because if you are struggling with a certain concept too much, it's too hard, it's too dense, then you have to know that there is a different way to think about it. There is a different way to approach it. There is a different way to troubleshoot. To me, that's a clear indicator. If I'm struggling, it could be within religion. If I'm struggling with a concept too hard, then I want to relearn it just a different way. That means that the way that I learned that specific concept doesn't work well. We're not here to fight with ourselves. Some believe that we are. Some believe that all of life and religious service is a battle. And when we overcome this huge battle that's littered with stress and frustration, then we're the victors and we've made it to the top of the mountain. Again, I don't subscribe to that way because that way doesn't work with me. I believe there's another way, and it's not a way of battle. It's a way of embrace. It's a way of positive growth. There are so many ways to understand, approach, solve each thing. So when we look at, for example, that, what do we see? We were taught a way of guilt. And then we learned a new way, because the new stuff that we're learning is telling us, don't feel guilty when you fall. because you will fall. We're human. We're not angels. Everyone falls. Don't feel guilty because the Yetzer Hara, your evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, his main purpose is for you to feel guilty, get down, get depressed. We learned this. Shalom Arush talks about this. The teachings of Reb Nachman. It's brought down from even deeper sources. Now, say you learned this, which a lot of people I know have. You learn in the book, it tells you, don't let yourself get down or depressed. That is the main purpose of the evil inclination. Tell me, why do you default back to feeling guilty? Do you think that the words in the book are just cute gestures to make you feel better and keep you locked into this cult? Not at all. The book is telling you we need to take the things that we learn more serious, think deeper into what we are learning, and align ourselves more with it, live it more. Instead of running after so many more stimulations and types of highs, the answer is the beauty, the grace, and the inner peace is right there. We have to live it more. We have to experience it more. I am talking to people who feel guilty after they fell when the book that you're learning is telling you don't feel guilty. Why do I have to tell you not to feel guilty? Why does it take an acquaintance, a friend, a peer, a family member to say, hey, I struggle the same way. This is how I don't. You're learning it yourself. I'm not making away, heaven forbid, the quality of friendship and family and discussion. Not at all. The point that I'm trying to make is you have the answers. You're struggling for no reason. Let it go. One of two things are taking place. Either you're learning and you've already learned the new way and you haven't implemented it, or you have to learn a new way. There are ways in which to approach each thing that it's not a battle. It's not a fight. It's not a struggle. It's so satisfying, every step you take forward. So this is the issue that I am seeing. I'm seeing the gap between what we're learning and what we're living, when what we are learning is telling us not to live the way that we're living. What I'm doing, I'm just sharing what I learned. I'm not making up new concepts here. The Breslov outlook, and I won't speak for other sects because I don't study that. The Breslov outlook, especially if you've listened to or follow Shalom Arush and Lazer Brody, Mata Frank, and various other mashpiyim who bring it down from Rabbi Nachman. The reason I mention this is because so many people I know have come back to a beautiful Judaism, a beautiful spirituality through these teachings. I've learned and continue to learn the books. I've listened to hundreds of CDs. I feel like I have less of a divide between what I was learning. And don't get me wrong, I'm not, there are a trillion things that I can't implement, that I am weak and I struggle with too. But in this particular area, I feel like I've come to, by the way, I feel like there was more of a divide going back, as I said. The closer you get to the start of that spiritual journey, the more fanaticism, obsession, and just too much you will find, and that's with everyone. But never too crazy. But moving forward, more and more recently, there was less and less of a gap, and that's one of the reasons why I'm able to see it for what it is, talk about it, and that's what I'm trying to share here. So with the Breslova teachings, for example, the books, the lessons, they're telling you what you should and shouldn't feel, what you should and shouldn't do. Yet you're feeling it and doing it anyway. That's because you're still defaulting back to the way you were taught when you grew up in the ultra-Orthodox extreme community, which you don't agree with. Let it go. Let it go for your sake. It's so liberating and so freeing when you let that go. There is another approach. I think I'm going to stop emphasizing that point right now. I have another point that I'd like to share. There are so many ways this is a conversation. This is an ongoing conversation. This is an idea to ponder. It's part of our journey to look at all of these things and continuously weigh it and figure out if we're going in the right direction. So this is by no means done. I may sound repetitive in 20 minutes from now. I may even make more recordings in the future if I feel like I've missed crucial points and it has to be emphasized again. I think these are beautiful things that have to be continuously evaluated. The second point that I want to make now, though, is the main point of the podcast. Know where you are. One of the reasons why we feel guilty and stressed out and depleted and all these negative emotions and feelings and feel so used up is because we're not realistic with where we really are holding. There's a huge difference, and we have to learn this. This is so important. There's a mega difference, a major difference between our ideal and our reality. Our ideal, I would describe as the things that we look up to. For example, ideally, we look up to the notion of not masturbating and wasting seed. In reality, more than 90% of males do it, and if they're religious and Jewish, they still do it. They what we call fall through or have weak moments. So you see the difference? The ideal is the stuff that we learn, value, believe in, and look forward to or look up to. The reality is what we are actually doing day to day. The reality is what our life is. I believe there's a huge unconscious confusion and mix-up between the ideal and the reality for a lot of the individuals who are struggling with this precise thing. We start our spiritual journey by learning tons of ideals. Our minds we align with it. Our minds really feel it. We really this makes so much sense. I believe in this. I want to follow this path. This is healthy. This is good for me. This is the truth. And we forget about the reality, or perhaps we never even knew the reality. Perhaps we always lived in fantasy. But the problem with focusing on the ideal and pretending like you are the ideal, that your life is the ideal, is that you're not in reality. You're not being realistic with where you really are. That's where this notion of know where you are comes in. This isn't my idea, again. I remember listening to a CD from Shalom and Laser years ago about knowing where you are. None of these ideas are new. Again, we're learning it, we're not implementing it. Where he talks about megalomania, people who think they're Mashiach, and people who think they're the president. And these are real phenomena, but even trickled down on a lower level, we all get confused between our ideal and our reality. So what we want to try to do is literally separate the two in our minds and understand. This is what I meant by compartmentalization. This requires so much thinking and separating and organizing. Figure out what the ideal is. I've figured out what my ideal is, the things I look up to, the things I strive for, yet I'm perfectly aware of my reality. Hence, I don't feel guilty. I don't stress out. The point of this exercise of learning the ideal versus the reality and to separate the two and to start living in accordance is to solve what we discussed before the issue. You can start living stress-free. The only reason you're stressing out and giving up and struggling so much with the things that you love, the things nobody's forcing you, you're the one that's practicing it, is because you're tied up in the ideal, and that's not where you're holding. As soon as you come to terms with where you really are holding in life, in spirituality, with your emotions and everything across the board, you can start being at peace with the actions that you're taking. Why? Laser Brody writes in The Trail to Tranquility, which is a book he authored, expectations, this is his quote, I quote, expectations minus realizations equals anger, end quote. Again, expectations minus realizations equals anger or frustration. What does that mean? If you add up all the things that you expect yourself to be stronger, you expect yourself to daven every day and put on tefillin, you expect yourself to do 60 minutes of personal prayer, and then we minus your realizations, what you actually achieved. The sum that remains is the volume, is the amount of frustration, anger, and disgust you might feel. What happens if you take away expectations altogether? There's no frustration, there's no anger, there's no disappointment, there's no stress. That's the goal here. Take away all expectations, and the way to do that is by being realistic, becoming aligned with the real you, the reality, not the ideal. Know what the ideal is. This is what I'd like to bring out in a very refined manner. Know what the ideal is. I know what my ideal is. And no matter how low I go in reality, in my real life, I'll never stop looking at the ideal and as the goal. But I'll be realistic at where I'm holding today. So if I'm strong one year and I wake up for Vasikin every day, and that is my ideal, hoorah, I did it, I'm doing it, I'm up there. But if next year I'm weak and I can't get up, I'm realistic, it doesn't bring me down. But I know that that's still the ideal and I still want to do that. So when you completely come to terms with the reality, and you strip away the expectations, because again here the expectations is the ideal. The ideal shouldn't have expectation connected to it. It should be mutually exclusive. You should know what the ideal is from an intellectual, from an intellect standpoint, from an idealist standpoint. But you should also know where you are. Now, hopefully I've made this point clear. Forgive me if I haven't. Freestyling here, no notes, not following anything, just expressing it as I feel it and as it comes to mind over the discussions we have. Now, one opposition that always pops up with these things, because I already know the arguments. Don't forget, I grew up in the community. I learned other versions of Judaism and outlook. I know the arguments. I'm the one that's sitting with people I know who agree with all of the teachings that I'm learning. They themselves learn it, yet they'll even argue and subconsciously defend the stuff that they were taught growing up. So what are one of these things? A quick defense is, if you don't feel guilt, if you become perfectly content with reality, then nothing's going to prod you, nothing's going to push you to excel, to do tshuva, to become better, to continue to grow. And that is not true. That is simply not true. The reason you think that, again, is because that's how you were taught initially. Remember, if you could just throw away, put aside all that you were taught and conditioned growing up. We want an empty keli. Give me the empty vessel. We could start pouring in new ways to approach old things. So your old way of approaching this guilty topic, or this we have to stress out topic, would be, oh, it's beneficial. But it's not beneficial. Because if it was beneficial, we wouldn't be having the conversation. I wouldn't be consoling you with on your spiritual deficits and stresses, and because you wouldn't have them. If your way worked, when we got together, we would just be talking good and positive and beautiful things. But we're not. We're talking about how hard it is and how we should cope with ABC. Now, this is life stuff, don't get me wrong. Don't run away from these conversations. These conversations are awesome, and they spark out-of-the-box solutions. But for the sake of my point and this podcast and what I'm trying to bring out, if your way worked, if what you're defending works, we wouldn't have that conversation. It obviously doesn't work. And if I'm on the same journey as you and I'm not going through those same stresses and I'm doing the same things you're doing, and I don't feel used up and I don't feel like I'm giving up, then we want to look and we want to say, what's different? And that's what I do. I do that naturally and with the utmost love and expression. I love to share it with others too, if it could help anyone. Kol hakavod. So we need to separate the reality of our life with the ideal. And if your defense is that you're going to become too easygoing, nonchalant about your practice and your spirituality and your this and your that, don't. When we learn in our books to take baby steps, when it says in our book that if you become religious and your spouse is not, you shouldn't comment or say anything to her, it's not just written there so you could think, oh, that's cool. And then you go home and tell her something about becoming religious because you're feeling it now. Again, the teachings that you've connected to, the better version of this Judaism, and it doesn't have to be what I'm talking about here, Breslov Outlook. You could be listening to anyone. If you've reconnected or connected to Judaism in a beautiful light and you're struggling, I'm sure the teachings that you're learning are giving you the answers. Dig deep. See if your actions really align. If it's telling you not to be guilty, don't feel guilty. It's not a cute gesture. It's telling you what to do. It's telling you that what you were taught growing up is not correct. It doesn't work. And you know it doesn't work because you feel guilty and you're depressed. You feel guilty and you're giving up. So we want to align. Align with what we're learning. We want to close the gap. I feel that the more you close the gap between what we're learning and how we're acting, the less stress, the less frustration, the less depression, the less giving up. The more we strip away from expectation, the less we hurt ourselves. So this is what it means, know where you are. It is of utmost importance for our emotional and spiritual health to know, acknowledge, embrace, and love where we are, where we're holding. In this way, we could build step by step, piece by piece. If we're occupying any other fantasy other than where we're really holding, and if it requires taking a step back, don't be afraid of it. I've always said this. What's better, to take 3 steps back and build gradually, or to jump in, dive in head first, and then give up everything 3 years down the road? And these are not fake phenomenons. You see this every day. This is as real as sunlight. You either are going to approach it the right way, you'll feel good about it, or you're going to come to struggle with it years down the road and neglect it completely, get upset about it, get depressed, continue to try to live that way, and you'll live with daily regret because you don't feel like you're living up to your expectations. What is better? I mean, you tell me. Obviously, taking a couple steps back is better. And that's very hard for someone who's just begun the practice to do, because again, we know that when the new spiritual practitioner is like a missionary, it becomes overly obsessed and enthralled. They jump at everything. They're like, rah, So it's very hard for a newbie. But I feel like this conversation is a little bit more for someone who's been on the journey for some years. If you've been on the journey for some years, and you're at that crossroad where it's give up, take a couple steps back, rethink, ponder, figure out what the ideal is, what are the things that you look up to, and then compare it to where you're really holding. Know where you are, know how weak you are, know where you're falling through, and realistically, if you will or will not continue to fall through. And then actually live your life in accordance with the reality, not the ideal. There are certain aspects of our life that we live in accordance with the ideal. And that's usually the bigger things. For example, if I'm struggling to keep Shabbos now, I'm not just going to break it because it's hard for me one week, because it's an ideal. It's something I've already come to value and appreciate. So if I'm feeling weak, I don't have to break it. So yeah, there are times when you live in accordance with the ideal. Yeah, so I'll be a little bored one Shabbos and I'll pull through for the sake of the ideal. But if you water it down to lighter stuff that's not so big, and it's between giving up everything and giving up those things so you could breathe, so you could heal, so you could grow normally, then of course, take a couple steps back, figure out where you really are. There were times when I put on tefillin every day. There are times when I don't. Put on tefillin 4 days. There are times when I've prayed 30 to 60 minutes a day. There are times when I don't even pray. There are times when I've learned hours a day, and there are times when I don't learn at all. And when I don't do those things that I mentioned, that there were times that I did do, when I don't do them, I don't feel guilty. I don't get depressed. I don't feel like giving up. I don't question my ideals. Nothing. I know exactly what's happening, when it's happening, and why it's happening, and how I feel, and what I could possibly do to make it better. Slow and steady wins the race. Remember, baby steps. Approaching spirituality, life in general, all great and good endeavors with balance, with baby steps. Strip away the extremism that we left in its entirety, in every aspect, and embrace a new way, a new outlook. Think deeply into the stuff that you're learning and ask yourself, am I really living in accordance? I feel like we emphasize the hard things of what we learn and ignore the easy stuff. For example, if the book tells you to take on something, talk to Hashem for 60 minutes a day, I have to do that. And we try so hard. But when the book tells you don't feel guilty when you fall through, that you completely ignore. The easy thing, the gift that it's giving you. Not that personal prayer is not a gift. Personal prayer is the biggest gift. But, like in low physical terms, the gift, the easy street, the easy stuff that it's giving you, the stuff that it's supposed to help you cope and actually stay on the journey, the stuff that's going to assist in you being on the journey for the rest of your life, that stuff you ignore. Don't ignore that stuff. You should take that stuff more importantly and more to heart than the big stuff. The big stuff are to follow. 60 minutes a day comes. It doesn't happen. You know when it comes? When you can live spirituality, a spiritual lifestyle, year after year without giving up, without getting depressed, without worry, without doubt. And how are you going to do that if you don't implement the little stuff, the easy stuff? So evaluate what you're learning. Don't just pick out the big stuff. It says I should put on tefillin every day. I'm running to shul to put on tefillin. What about the fact that it says to take it easy and to take it slow and to do one thing at a time? We work in the weirdest ways in reverse. Our priorities are often skewed. We're humans. We can't discern and dissect all these things on our own. We grew up in the ways that we grew up. They weren't the best. They didn't teach us, didn't give us quite the necessary tools to know all of this that I'm describing. But we have an opportunity to learn, grow, desire. And with all of these things combined, and with Hashem's help, with a ton of desire and hard work. And the hard work that I'm talking about is not service. It's not devekos. It's going easy on yourself. Take a step back. Be real. Grow steadily. Don't go so fast that you have to take 10 steps back every single year, or that you have to give up completely. Grow in realistic stages. Once you figure out the real you, the realistic aspect of your life, where you're really holding, where you are really at, then you could grow in a way in which it complements that. Because until then, it's purely the outcome of what we were taught growing up. Unless we make a conscious effort to throw that out, to start with in a new way, in a new light, it's not going to happen on its own. I don't struggle with these aspects of my journey for a reason. I went through a very similar journey as others, and I've learned and I am learning the same stuff as many others. And that is because of the effort, the constant thinking and rethinking, and because of the emotional development that I am investing in side by side. And if you listen to my last 2 podcasts, you'll learn about that. And of course there are more aspects, but those are the big stuff. You could be free too. You could be married to a spiritual life for your whole life without risk of losing it or giving up if you approach it the right way. And one of the ways in which to do that is to get rid of what we were taught while we were being abused in school. Empty ourselves. Complete emptiness. Humility. Throw away our brains. And let something brighter, more positive, more impacting fill it. With Hashem's help, my idea shall help pave a path in your journey. Hopefully everything I've said made sense. I pray for myself and for all of my loved ones, friends and family, to continue on the good journey, and hopefully we will all reach a state of inner peace, calmness and contentness speedily. Thank you again for tuning in. Blessings and love.